Announcing a game before it's on track for release is a huge risk.
And these days, it's probably going to do more harm than good.
Let's talk about it.
Lucy, why are we talking about this?
We had to do an FTC episode. No, I'm kidding. But one of the interesting little tidbits that has come out of the FTC, Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard drama, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, is that IGN's Reb Valentine reported that a publisher report saying that the Perfect Dark reboot that was announced back in 2020 is actually not as far along as we all kind of thought it was. So, game was announced back at the Game Awards in 2020. In Reb's report, she wrote that it's actually in early stages of development. We're probably not going to play it for a few years yet.
A long time.
As a long time. Although time has no meaning anymore.
No, it's a big fat flat circle.
But it got us to thinking, what are the pros and cons of developers and publishers announcing games and making the consumer, the players, the gamers wait for it? In some cases, which we'll talk about, either that wait is very, very long, and sometimes that wait goes on indefinitely.
As you mentioned, the background of this is the IGN report from Rebecca, which effectively is saying that we're not going to play it for some time. The reboot was announced at the Game Awards 2020, as you mentioned. It's being developed by a new studio called The Initiative. That was 2.5 years ago. So conventional thinking would say that should be quite far into the development cycle, right? So even somewhat close, relatively speaking, to the finish line. Like if we think about like majority of it, 3 to 4 years is what.
Unless Matt, but you did recently say the average dev life cycle right now is 5
to 6, yeah. But like conventional thinking is like that would be significantly into the development phase. That game was announced with a CGI trailer, and the Initiative said to Rebecca, at the time we showed the trailer, we hadn't even figured out any of our core game mechanics. We didn't even really know what type of game we are making, which is wild. I mean, baseline, it's probably going to be a first-person shooter of some sort, but like that is a wild thing.
That's like the dev equivalent of making a mood board before you decorate a room.
They were like, listen, we've got a Pinterest board, okay?
We've got the name.
We've got Joanna Dark.
We've got 3 A's. We've got triple A's. We're going to add another A on there.
Exactly. We got 4 A's, Joanna Dark, and a gun that can shoot through walls. How's that sound? Matt Booty was like, love it. Get to work. So this kind of stuff happens for a bunch of reasons, right? Like, and Rebecca talks about it in the report. It's like all of them are just the realities of game development. Like if you speak to any developer, they're probably going to be like, yeah, that sounds like a normal game development cycle.
Because as well, I mean, if you're taking into account the fact that Initiative is a new studio, staffing and hiring takes a hell of a long time. Yeah. As people who staff and hire, even just for a website, for a comparatively speaking, much smaller team, that takes forever.
Nightmare. It's a nightmare, yeah. So Initiative is thought of the developer of the game, but it's actually a co-development effort with Crystal Dynamics, the team behind The Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Where is it? Where is that remake?
Jesus Christ.
But also Certain Affinity was attached to the project at one point as well, which is a thing that's easily forgotten. That is already a tricky process. A co-development, it's like, it's more common these days than it used to be, but it's still tricky. And then top of that, there's discussions in that report about like the ideas kept changing. We didn't really have a lock on what the core of the game was going to be, so they made prototypes that's then were scrapped, and then the project went back to the drawing board a bunch of times. The problem is we're told about these games.
Just go like the problem is
we're told about these games and the production at a time when I would probably argue it's not smart to do so. And for better or worse, the result of that it creates an expectation, right?
Yep.
So for Perfect Dark, we were told about it in 2020. We shown a CGI trailer. My man Matt comes along. He's like, I played that shit.
Yeah.
It rocks.
And everyone's like,
oh
my God.
Sick. That will be out in no time. And then along the way, things happen that can often, not just for Perfect Dark, but for a lot of games, can like reinforce those expectations and often like the stuff that you say positive is way more likely to hold water than anything that you might say to try and control the expectation or even lower it. Matt Booty's thing where he told Axios, I played it, I looked at it, I'm very excited for it, is one of those reinforcement things, right? So when a report like this comes out, in the case of Perfect Dark, where it's like, hey, this game is very early in development and it's probably going to be quite a few years until we see it, it can be damaging in a bunch of ways, right?
When a report like this comes out, it can damage in a way, it can damage the perception of the developer or even the publisher or even the franchise or even, especially when you are talking about a franchise that is tied specifically to a platform, as Perfect Dark is tied with Xbox, it can be damaging towards Xbox.
The conversation becomes, is this thing even real? Will it ever come out? And I think like part of what contributes to that is we live in an information age where we know pretty much everything about a game. Like,
and you know what? We shouldn't.
We shouldn't. We really shouldn't. And that's
fundamentally believe that human beings were not equipped or evolved to the state where we have access to this much information.
We were supposed to know 5 people at a time, okay? You're supposed to have 5 friends, and that's it.
We live in this information age, and obviously, being part of the games media, we're a part of that. Hands up, we're guilty.
What a problem.
You're looking at Beyond Good and Evil 2. Ooh. A game that you actually even saw.
Beyond Good and Evil 2 was a preview where I left that preview and I could not be more convinced that it was never going to be made. Like they were literally like, here's a piece of art of Beyond Good and Evil 2 and framed on a wall.
Here's Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
And there were like a bunch of pictures on a wall, and then they were like, now, what do you have? Do you have any questions from Michelle Ansel? And my response was, no, I don't. You showed me JPEGs on a wall.
There's Blizzard has a new survival game, Metroid Prime 4, Deep Down, Silk Song.
So these are all games that were shown and either have basically been killed or been missing so long that people are starting to get pretty, Silk Song, like we said, is like constantly brought up, and this absence is frustrating. Even Microsoft said it was going to be out by now. Beyond Good and Evil, dead. And then there's other games that we now know are in development that have been announced, but they've been announced so far in advance that
Todd Howard with that
Todd,
beautiful jacket.
A beautiful jacket. You've got a winning smile and those luscious curly locks. I just want to put my finger through them.
But Elder Scrolls 6 was announced at the same time as Starfield. We're finally getting Starfield this year, but Elder Scrolls 6 from now is 5+ years away.
And Elder Scrolls is a franchise where when you say I am making the new fantasy game in the Elder Scrolls series, that is the only thing people care about. That's all they want to hear about.
Ken Levine's new thing, which we now finally know is called Judas.
Judas, no.
Dead Island 2 was in development hell for like 10+ years. Duke Nukem Forever, obviously the infamous
Rescued by Randy Pitchford, and what a success that was.
Versus 13 and then it was 15.
And
Kingdom Hearts 3 they announced back in 2013. That didn't come out for like another 5 years. Last Guardian. Even Cyberpunk was 8 years. We know there are very good reasons why things are announced early.
Tell me why.
Stock prices looks great, especially if you're in the middle of something like an acquisition.
Case in point
Beyond Good and Evil 2 with Ubisoft, they were going to be taken over by Vivendi. The Gilmos were not fond of that, and so they're like, what have we got in the back catalog that people are clamoring for a new game in the franchise? Sam Fisher, no way! Beyond Good and Evil.
The announcement of that game did the job it needed to. It like raised interest around Ubisoft. It gave a lot of people faith that they knew what people wanted, and it helped them kind of, in some part, defend against a hostile takeover.
Like we said earlier, with regards to the initiative staffing up, it's a very difficult, arduous process, especially because a lot of the times you're being asked, you can't be asked to go work on a project that you don't know what it is.
No.
And so, in the case of Blizzard announcing their survival game, they openly did it as a recruitment thing. They went, hey, come help us make the next big Blizzard game. And if you look, there is like one piece of art.
It's one piece art. It also can help people or help companies keep others excited about their thing. Like Microsoft announced Perfect Dark, at the time when it didn't have a lot else going on, there was like discussions about Xbox first party titles and big exciting projects, and then along came Perfect Dark, along came Fable, and it created buzz around
Halo Infinite. In a new console year, you want to be telling people what they are spending their money on, what they're going to get to play.
I know a lot of people that are like, I'm buying this console because of X game that's I've been promised many, many years down the line. They just want to be there and be ready for it. Is all that worth the risk and the potential headache of a situation where it blows up in their faces or like some issues arise, as they constantly do in game development, that suddenly turns that whole situation upside down? I would argue, like in the case of Perfect Dark, it wasn't worth it. It reminds me the way I feel of Scalebound, whereas like they announced Scalebound and Platinum, and I was like, hell yeah, I am all on board with this. And then as we learned more and more about that game, like by the time it came to it, it was like, oh yeah, we can't make this game. Maybe it's time for publishers to really rethink when they announce games, and whether announcing a game so far in advance is really worth the ire and scrutiny and the potential headache that can come from having to readjust your kind of plans and development efforts, which feels more likely to happen than everything going smoothly.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Spot On. We'll be back again next Friday. You can find me on Twitter at LeeJamesGames.
You can find me at TomorH.
Bye.
Bye.